It's a beautiful Monday morning. Good morning. This morning, I am Nifemi Oguntoye, standing in for Yobi Folari, fondly called Uncle Yuri, on this show. Now, last week Friday, the social media was agog when 5 candidates slugged it out at the vice presidential debate organized ahead of the 2019 general elections. The candidates were selected by the Presidential Election Debates Group and a group of broadcast stations affiliated to the Broadcasting Organization of Nigeria. They included vice presidential candidates of the Allied Congress Party of Nigeria, the ACPN, Ganiyu Galadima, Alliance for New Nigeria, ANN, Khadija Abdullahi, and of course the All Progressives Congress vice presidential candidate Yemi Osinbajo, People's Democratic Party PDP candidate Peter Obi, as well as the Young Progressives Party YPP Umar Getso. Although all 5 candidates marshaled their points during the debate, candidates of the 2 major parties, the APC and PDP, attracted the most attention on Friday night. Some of the candidates also posted their claims on their verified Twitter handles after the debate. Of course, some of the candidates evidently gave out a huge number of facts and figures at the debate. While some of these submissions are true, a couple of fact checks have identified that a good number of these submissions are false, grossly exaggerated, or only partly true. Now, let me introduce my guest to you this morning as we review that particular debate and also talk about the importance of such civil discourse at entrenching and deepening democracy in this part of the world. I have Mr. Bafemi George, public affairs analyst. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here today.
Dr. Fasi Yusuf is a lawyer and communications consultant. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's begin. And it was earlier in the year where INEC chairman Mahmoud Yakub said debates were a vital part of the democratic process. As a matter of fact, he was of the opinion that it will help guide the decision of voters. But quite a number of politicians have said that debates wouldn't matter who wins this election, at least not in 2019. What are your thoughts as regards that?
Well, I don't know which of the politicians and where they're coming from and what they believe in, but I think that debate is very good. It's quite healthy. It's an opportunity for the candidate to actually, it's like a one-on-one meeting with the electorate to tell them where we're coming from, where we are, and where they're taking us to. So I think it's very healthy for our democratic system.
It's important to note at this point that, of course, it is no doubt fantastic to hear from someone who wants to run for office and find out how and what exactly he's going to do. But what really is the real value? Because when you look at the objectivity of the viewer, especially on social media, every viewer seems to already know who he is supporting. So before anybody says anything, he's already making opinion. What are your thoughts as regards that?
Well, ordinarily, like my colleague said, debate, such as the one we had on Friday, is always encouraged, and it has a way of deciding which way the voter will go. But regrettably, in our own climb, we are not yet at that level where it will matter most. Well, to some extent, maybe sophisticated voters, yes, but not the ordinary man. There are so many issues we have to contend with. One, how many viewers are we talking about? Number 2, where's the electricity to power the television sets or the radio stations? And in any case, in the face of competing economic doldrums.
You don't think that social media has changed the format
the
now?
perception or to swing voters? Not necessarily, to my mind. We're talking about negligible view. If you take any poll now, perhaps we're talking about 1% of the voters. That's if you have about 80 voters, we're talking about maybe 80,000 to 100,000. I don't think we're talking about 10%, which would be about 8 million. So it's quite negligible, but to some extent it's a welcome development, and that's the way it's done elsewhere. And we should be seen to be doing something like that, maybe with time and with awareness, with development within the political landscape, the economic landscape, we may have some improvement.
We've seen political debates play a prominent role in a country like the United States. But they say at times a great leader might not be a great debater. In your opinion, does eloquence equate with competence or performance in government?
Not necessarily. That I can communicate doesn't make me a good leader. Even though being a good leader requires that you should be able to pass across your vision to the people you're leading or you intend to lead. But you should also realize that communications also goes beyond the leader speaking. There are so many mediums through which I can communicate my ideas and visions to the electorate. The TV is just one of such. There could be printed materials, there could be jingles on radios, there could be sensitization at the grassroots. So there are many ways the vision can be communicated to the people. So not necessarily that the leader himself should be an orator, even though it helps. I would say that it helps, but I don't think that you can equate that with capacity.
But for a leader in Nigeria at such a time like this, do we need someone who can, you know, to an extent, inspire followership in this mode of leadership?
I think what we are really looking for is character. It's integrity. We've seen some governors who can really talk, who are always in the news. And we know that we can see the deficiency in their character. So that you can talk doesn't make you a good leader. What we need right now is a morally upright leader, a leader with integrity that Nigerians can look up to and say, this man is trustworthy. I think that's more important than oratory skills.
It's all right. Let's narrow it down now to the just concluded vice presidential election debate in Abuja. There's a nagging question of whether to expand the number of candidates. While that debate was ongoing, supporters of a particular candidate were outside protesting. They're of the opinion that the fact that he was not represented totally nullifies the essence of that particular exercise. There are about 73 candidates, presidential candidates, the highest we've had in the history of this country. Yes. I'm wondering what it's going to look like to put all of them together on one stage.
Well, that's the nasty thing about democracy. Ordinarily, they should be allowed. But when you think in terms of the huge number of people, candidates, 73 of them, how would the logistics be worked out? And again, don't forget that the big group told us how they arrived at the 5 candidates or the 5 political parties. That's right. In terms of followership, in terms of the poll they conducted, in terms of the other criteria they adopted. So it's going to be pretty difficult. But then, ordinarily, in a democracy, you don't underrate anybody. There could be some surprises. We've had that in Lagos State before. If you remember during the time of Otedola and all that, it was another dog. Yet, he might be the governor of Lagos State. So, but as we have it now, it's not feasible. You have 75 candidates. It means you have to spread it over a period of at least 14 episodes. That's right. And that debate took 3 hours. Now, 3 hours times 14, you're talking about 42. So how would they be able to afford that? And how many days? Who will stay glued to a television set? 3 hours a day times 14 days. That is awesome. That would be incredible. So I think we have to make do with what we have at the moment, especially when the criteria have been unassailable. It's not something you can fault, unless perhaps you want to allege some wrongdoings on the part of those involved. And I don't think the presidential debate group, others that are involved will want to compromise the standard they stand for, and perhaps their integrity, and perhaps their character.
As of 2011, there were just about 24 parties, and it's 2019, and there are over 90 of them registered. In 2015, we had 11 presidential candidates, and then I'm wondering, what happened between 2015 and 2019? There are 73 candidates running for the presidency. What does that really tell you?
I think it's very healthy for our nascent democracy. It shows that our level of political awareness is improving. It shows that people are becoming politically conscious and they want to get involved in the political system. So it's not a bad thing. And you see, over time, most of those parties will either fizzle away or they will fuse into the dominant parties. So I don't think it's something that should be discouraged. And I like the fact that INEC actually registered most of them, because not doing that will mean that they are, denying them their right as citizens. So I see that in the next 2-3 election cycles, eventually it's going to be an organic growth. We will create maybe like a 2-3, maximum 4 political system. That's what I see happening.
And get ready for a very long ballot paper, because if we are going to have 73 candidates, it's perhaps going to look like a cumbersome exercise. But let's focus on the vice presidential debate and look at how the candidates perform. There are some who have the opinion that only the vice president and the PDP vice presidential candidate displayed any real grasp of the issues, that the other 3 were a mere distraction from that event. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, to some extent, they may be right, but if you look at it the other way too, just like an exam you are not prepared for, you didn't know where they were coming from, and therefore you just went there and just taking a chance and all that. But generally, these are issues that will normally confront politicians. You must, like the Boy Scout, be ready at all times. You must be ready to answer questions and all that. But in the opening, you said that would that be a test of the strength of a political party, nay, a candidate? My answer is that it may not necessarily be so.
That's right.
And that not being at your best on that day will not amount to your incompetence, your unpreparedness, and your inability to perform. So I believe that if you have another scenario, something else may play out, and therefore it will be too early in the day to really say, return a verdict. And in any case, depending on the divide you belong to, so whatever your candidate is saying, you might think is right, and the other candidate will say, look, you are not right. So it all depends on perception. So it's really pretty difficult. And again, when you talk about conducting a poll or what have you, so some of them are even subjective.
I get you.
So if you're talking about other climes, nobody ever predicted that Donald Trump will ever win. And in any case, he did not win the popular vote, but by the collegiate system, he was able to become the president of the United States of America. You now see the mess he's making of America. The same thing in Britain. The same thing in France. Look at what's happening in France now. Macron is having his lowest rating. And that's so in other places. So there's so many issues that play around, and we need to contend with.
So were you impressed really by any of the other candidates apart from the 2 big ones at the debate?
Not really. Not really. Apart from the vice president, I think the other 3 underestimated the office of the vice president. In our constitution, different from other climes where we practice federal system of government, it clearly states that the VP is actually in charge of the economy. It sits over the economic team. That is very sensitive. That is very crucial. I was a bit taken aback when one of the ladies was asked about subsidy, and she was really stammering. And I feel that even if you don't feel that you're going to win, the fact that you've put yourself out as a candidate, you should be prepared.
Doesn't that tell you also
how
unserious some candidates and parties appear to be, and perhaps the need to cut down on the numbers so that we're not really distracted from what the real issues are in an election year?
It's their right to run for office. If the bus conductor decides to run for presidency and he wins the nomination of a party, you can't stop him. Okay, so it's their right. But in my opinion, I think, permit me to use the word, some of them just want to be popular. Because when you engage them, I sat here in this studio about 3 months ago, there was a presidential candidate that came here. And by the time we got out and I engaged him, to be honest, it was laughable. Because I tell myself, this is Nigeria, a nation of 200 million people. Presidency or vice presidency is no joke. So whoever is coming out, putting yourself out to run for that office or to be a vice president, it's serious business.
And apart from heading the economic team of government, advising Mr. President. There are some who would say that much of the responsibility of the vice president is at the wills and caprices of the, the
president.
The president. It depends really what the president delegates him to do. How relevant do you think this debate has been as regards picking a candidate to lead us? After all, the VP only would represent the president when he's not around.
Oh, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, that would be a very, very uncharitable thing to say about the office of the vice president. For God's sake, if anything happens to the president, he comes in. He sees in for the president in his absence. He presides over National Executive Council meeting. It belongs to nearly every board, commission, like the National Economic Council, the National Council of States and others, and so many others. The vice president has a very critical role to play in the scheme of things. And his office can never be downplayed.
So to an extent too, the choice of your running mate should also reflect, the quality of the choices you will make as president.
Yes, it's only in some states that you see the deputies of the governors being spare tires. But at the federal level, it will be difficult to be so because of the enormous responsibilities attached to that office constitutionally.
And we can't even forget too hurriedly how former President Goodluck Jonathan emerged the #1 citizen in this country.
Absolutely.
But then we've also seen how some difficulties between the principal and his vice, such in the case of the former president Obasanjo. He even, made mention of the crisis between him and his vice in his recently published book. How important really is that relationship? Some have praised the incumbent vice president for sitting tight and doing well, especially when his principal was not around. What should be the ideal relationship?
I think that's where character comes in. That's where integrity comes in. When you have a vice president who has integrity, who is a man of character, he will have no intention of usurping the power of his principal. The crisis between former President Obasanjo and former Vice President Atiku was a crisis of integrity because the president lost confidence in the vice president because they felt that the vice president was trying to usurp his power and he was doing so many things that wasn't in consonant with his own personal vision. And for me, I think that spells doom for us as a nation. So if you want to pick a president or a vice president, like I said earlier on, we need to look at the character of the person. One of the major reasons why we have a cordial relationship right now existing between the president and the current vice president is because they are both men of integrity. They are both men of good character. Even while the president was sick and the vice president superintended over the nation for a long period of time, he held it very well and he never for once felt, oh, this is an opportunity for me to usurp power. If what happened last year had happened during the days of President Obasanjo and Vice President Atiku in those days, it would have been the outcome would have been completely different. So it brings to the fore the importance of who occupies that office. And like I've said, you must be careful because you see, we must remember that the president can become invalid. The president could die. And when that happens, the #2 becomes the president. So which means whoever you're going to pick as vice president must also have the capacity to be the president.
It's all right. But let's look at some of the issues that arose at that particular debate. Quite a number of figures were brandished by the candidates, who came up with some amazing figures. And in this age of the internet, whatever claim you're making in the public space, people have their mobile devices to
fact check.
Absolutely.
Google is a friend at such a time
Absolutely.
like this. And that also, colored the conversation that ensued on social media afterwards. How important is this to our polity, the fact that citizens are getting aware and they are also questioning even facts and figures quoted in a debate?
Well, the sophistication of the electorate will determine the quality of
the leaders
and the type of political landscape we're going to experience. So to that extent, we need to thank technology for allowing us to be able to access some of this information. And I like to think that with this, I think whoever is coming up to engage in any debate will be very careful in really not facts and figures, because this could be cross-checked and fact-checked to determine the authenticity, the reliability, or perhaps even the integrity of the person making the claims or the assertions. Because in the past, you could decide to bamboozle your people, but then we discovered now that it's not possible to bamboozle all the people all the time. And sooner than later, they will discover that perhaps you'll be taking them on a jolly ride.
And then they find the truth thereafter.
Yes.
But I hope that these people fact-checking are also the people that will vote on election day. Can we, be so excited about the fact that, quite a number of Nigerians were engaged on social media, and this will reflect in the quality of decision-making at the polls?
Not necessarily. As of last month, I think we have about 87 million registered voters. Now, how many Nigerians do we have on social media? Let's take Facebook, for instance. Less than 20 million. So, which means that's just about 20-25% of registered voters. So we can't equate the conversation on social media to reflect the voting pattern when it comes to real election. That's number one. Now, number two, in terms of the data that were being brandished at the debate, to be honest, I felt sad at the end of the day about a particular candidate, because all the data it was brandishing, it sounded so good when it was making those assertions. But just going on my iPad, and I realized that no, this is false. This is false. And by the time I fact-checked 1, 2, 3 data, I realized that it's all false. It's not good for someone seeking to be the vice president of a nation. It's better for you not to even brandish any data at all than to brandish false data. We should be careful. Well, but like I said, unfortunately, what happens on social media doesn't translate to vote on the election day. If that were to be the case, I can tell you that that particular candidate would have lost some people just by the mere fact that 40% of the data that he brandished were false.
All right, so let's hit the nail on the head. We're just going to cite some, pick out some of those figures. It was the PDP presidential vice presidential candidate in arguing the petroleum subsidy being a waste of resources. He was quoted to have said that only 2 million vehicles, are in Nigeria. And according to the National Bureau of Statistics, the figures are way higher than that, about 11 million. How fundamental is that mistake?
Well, I think it could be a mistake of the head. It could be deliberate. Well, the ways of politicians are just strange to some of us. And that it might be deliberate. It might just not be. It might just be intended to bamboozle the voters or perhaps the viewers. So it all depends on his mindset and perhaps what people will make of it when the truth has now been told.
It also calls to check right now the need for comprehensive data system in this part of the world. The vice president, for instance, was quoted to have said that Nigeria produces 90% of the rice it consumed. There are many people who are saying that that cannot be confirmed to be true. The fact that there are quite a number of foreign rice that are still being seized by customs as we speak, in their millions, and that's just a fraction of what we expect is coming into the country. Many of these locally produced rice, you can find them on the shelf in the market.
The data was based on what comes through our port and not what is smuggled through the border. And if you look at the bill, what we've been able to save from rice importation, you can see that we've actually done over 90%. About 2 months ago, the CBN governor told us that our monthly importation bill dropped from $560 million per month to over $100 million. And that tells you that our importation is reducing. So it's not just even in rice alone, same thing in sugar, same thing with the policy on, the list of 42 items. Those are areas that government, I think, is doing well, that is reducing, our over-dependence on importation, which I think it's good for us. So by and large, it's not just rice. It cuts across, I mean, several...
Dr. Fassi, do you agree with him?
Well, to some extent, because if you look at what's happening, well, rice, for example, well, we talk about Lagos, we talk about other areas that are very close to our borders and others. But if you go into the hinterland, most of our people are not patronizing imported rice any longer. So they depend on locally produced rice. And again, if you look at, like you said, the statistics from CBN and the National Bureau of Statistics, and from what we're getting from the agricultural sector, we discovered that people are taking to agriculture, and they're taking to rice, rice milling and what have you. So the Vice President, until that's something to the contrary, we want to believe what the Vice President said, and nobody has been able to dispute that. It's just conjectural. People saying that some rice bags are coming to the country and other. Yes, they could come, but then what is the percentage of that? Can you compare that to when you have shiploads of rice and what have you?
Mr. Obi also claimed that Nigeria has fallen on the Global Competitive Index to 127 from 124. According to the 2018 World Economic Forum report, Nigeria rose on the index by 10 places, moving from its 2017 spot of 125 to 115.
Yes.
I'm wondering, are there different indexes, indices in this regard?
Well, maybe Mr. Obi will tell us where he got his own data from. Because if we just Google that right now and you go to the World Economic Forum site, you would see that data. So it's not the government data. It's not the CBN data. It's World Economic Forum's data. Okay. But to say moving up didn't just happen overnight. A country doesn't grow by prayer and by miracles. It's because there are deliberate policies on the side of the government, and those policies are being religiously implemented.
That's right.
And it's the impact of those policies that makes international bodies like that to make us move up in all those kind of ranking, either it's competitive forum or whatever you call it. It's simply because the policies are working. If you allow me, if you look at the things that the government is doing in terms of re-engineering our economy, not just agriculture, even in terms of corruption, in terms of infrastructure, because you can't grow if you're not putting infrastructure in place. It's because the government is doing certain things infrastructure-wise to ease business. I saw on the TV about a month ago where the vice president visited an MSME clinic somewhere in Northwest, I can't remember the exact state, whereby entrepreneurs can actually go to a one-stop shop, incorporate your business, get a NAFDAC seal, and all of those are things that improve a country's ranking on those kind of forums. And I think it should be encouraged.
Gentlemen, we'll just take a break now, but when we return, we'll keep fact-checking some of the statistics quoted at that particular debate. Of course, the audience were asked not to cheer and jeer, but they couldn't hold back, especially when certain statements were made. It was the PDP candidate who was saying that you don't close shop because you wanted to fight corruption. And the vice president said, so what happens if all your inventory are stolen and you're not in business at all? We'll be back with more. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching This Morning on TVC. And of course, we're reviewing the vice presidential election debate that held last week Friday. Interestingly, there are more facts that were checked. We might not have enough time to go through them, but it was the vice president who made mention that previous governments of the PDP practically abandoned the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. And the actual fact is that in 2013, the Jonathan government flagged up reconstruction of that highway. They actually budgeted 167 billion naira. Of course, 5 years after, we're still constructing. on that road?
Yes, I think at that time, the Jonathan administration, yes, flag of the reconstruction, but then there was no financial backing to the amount that was budgeted, and therefore nothing was done. So it's only this administration now that is trying to release funds, at times defaulting, but then this is when we are seeing substantial progress being made. But honestly, if you ask me, I think the progress is not good enough, and it should not be taking us years and years unending to reconstruct a road, not a new one. Of course, they've given us the reason that, well, because of the traffic on that road and all the rest. But then, if you ask me, I'm not an engineer, but why don't you just close down one side of the road, finish up with that side, and for not the way it's been done haphazardly. But the engineers might have their reasons, but that's my own candid opinion. Because you move to one side today, you move to another side tomorrow. To my mind, that's not good enough. Just close down one side, finish up with that, or decide you are reconstructing. Then after that, move on to the other one.
So the issues discussed at this particular debate, for you, how relevant are they? You know, the issue of economy, they talked about security, you know, social intervention and all of that. How relevant would you say these issues are to the current desires and needs of the average Nigerian?
Very, very, very relative and very germane. I'll take the social intervention programs as an example. In most developed economies all over the world, there's always one form of welfare program, one subsidy, just a way of making sure that you create a buffer for those who are living at the bottom of the pyramid. Because if you don't do that, then it's a major security challenge. If you look at America, for instance, I think this year's budget is about $6.7 trillion US, and 8% of that goes into welfare. That tells you that's almost 10% of that budget going to welfare. It tells you the importance that economy places on those people living at the bottom of the pyramid. So what the federal government is doing at the moment through those SIPs should be encouraged, and they are very important. The JIP, the trader money, so many programs like that, even fuel subsidy, because even the subsidy is also one of those things helping people at the bottom of the pyramid to cushion the effect of a sudden increase in fuel price. Because if you remove subsidy today completely, like some of them, opine, what you will have happen is that, because you and I know that the increase in prices of commodities will not be commensurate to the increase in price of fuel. If the increase in price of fuel is 20%, you're going to be recording about 60, 70% in the prices of commodities. And who gets affected the most? It's the poor. So every responsible government will always put into their budget and their programs welfare system, because you know that you will always have the poor. Even in rich countries, you will always have the poor. Even our Lord Jesus said in Matthew 26:11 that the poor you'll always have with you. So we need to encourage the government to keep doing more. And I'm glad that the past 3 years, they've done more than any government whatsoever in terms of investment into welfare programs and all those SIPs.
Talking about the fuel subsidy, it was one of the main talking points at that particular debate. And the position of the PDP candidate was the fact that we seem to be spending much more on subsidizing fuel than we're spending on, critical sectors like health and all of that. Would you say that the APC candidate, the vice presidential candidate, was quite convincing in that regard?
Well, to my humble mind, yes, he is. Because, talk about any country you may want to think about or think of. Is it Britain? Is it America? United States of America? Is it Canada? Is it Australia? They have different forms of subsidies. For example, agriculture is highly subsidized in America. The same thing in Britain. And again, deliberately, countries who want to encourage some sectors to be able to export their goods and services, and therefore they're heavily subsidized. So if you have fuel, for example, crude oil is what we have in Nigeria. So I think it is only logical that we must have the benefit of what we produce. So if we subsidize it, it's never too much, unless there's no transparency, unless there's no credibility in the system. once you have credibility in the system, within the system, and you have people manning the various arms of this subsidy regime and others, and we're able to say, yes, we cannot fault what they're doing, then so, for God's sake, let the subsidy continue, because it has a multiplier effect.
Absolutely.
Like my colleague pointed out. If you, for example, deregulate the petroleum sector and you make it a all-commerce game, at the end of the day, in fact, once you have a price increase, it is always times two of what you'll be expecting.
Yeah. But unfortunately...
And in Nigeria today, whatever goes up does not come down.
Unfortunately, when the price of petrol per litre was increased from 87 naira, I think, to about 143 naira, the promise then was, well, that was the end to the topic of subsidy. Unfortunately, this is 2018, we're still talking about full subsidy.
But you must also realize and ask yourself a question. What actually drives subsidy? Now, for now, we don't refine enough petroleum products, okay? So whenever there's an increase on the price of crude oil, it affects the price of fuel. Because when we export our crude oil and we buy finished product, I'll give you an example. 2016, crude oil was selling, early 2016, crude oil was selling for like $27, $28 per barrel. If you look at our subsidy bill as at that time, it was almost non-existent. Today, it's $80 per barrel, which means that the cost of landing fuel has gone up because the price of crude oil has gone up. So that is what is affecting subsidy, number one. Then also the landing cost for the importers themselves. There's a shortfall, and that shortfall cannot be transferred onto the consumer. So government says, this is the landing cost. We will bridge the gap so that the common man can still buy this product at this particular price. That is subsidy. And what they've done, which I like, prior to this time, marketers were the one importing. And that process was greatly abused. In other words, you just go and bring in, you claim to have brought in 10 cargoes, and you falsify all kind of bill of lading, whereas you only brought in one, and government ended up paying for 10 cargoes. Now, this time around, it is the NNPC that is actually important. So that subsidy bill is on the balance sheet of NNPC. So to a large extent, not fully, but to a large extent, that abuse has been greatly reduced.
For the vice president, he's of the opinion that the real question to ask is whether Nigerians are ready to pay more for fuel. And I think he suggested precisely that removing subsidy would add 40 naira to a litre of petroleum. So the big question of whether we're ready to pay 183 naira per litre for petrol. But recall that just recently, the independent marketers have also, threatening to go on strike, asking government to pay them the 800 billion naira on subsidy claims.
Yes, I think I recall that even the National Assembly was requesting the federal government to pay the amount budgeted for all the amounts set aside. And the federal government promised that they were going to pay, I think it was last week, I don't know, and then they were going to pay what they promised. But the point is that in economics, economics will tell us when they're arguing about price increase and what have you, inflation, they talk about when variables are constant. You see, before the government could have said that, perhaps the government would have emphasized that the variables will be constant. But in this case, it was not constant. The price at that time was $27, as we're told. Now we're talking about 80, 85, depending. And tomorrow it may even go down. Tomorrow, it will go, depending on the how volatile the oil market is. So the government will be right. And because Nigerians will not be prepared, especially when we are gripping with excruciating economic doldrums. You don't expect people now to pay more. It's another way of saying, calling out the people to protest and all that. And I think no government at this critical stage will prepare for that.
I understand that we're having challenges with the phone lines, but keep trying. We look forward to hearing from you, especially your contribution as regards our topic of discussion for today. I believe the phone lines are showing on your screen, and you can be a part of it. Of course, quite a number of issues that were raised at that particular debate, but many people are concerned. Well, it's good to see that the two main parties were represented in the vice presidential debate. But perhaps the last time we had a presidential debate, between the two main candidates was in 1993, when, and it was indeed the first televised debate between late Bashir M.K. Abiola and SDP, the NRC candidate, Bashir Tofa. In 1999, General Olusegun Obasanjo refused to debate with Olufalaye. In 2003, when he showed up, it was General Muhammadu Buhari who did not come. In 2007, Mao Yar'Adua was absent, but his vice, Dr. Goodluck Jonathan at the time, was present. In 2011, the incumbent president didn't show up for the presidential debate organized by NN24. He decided to opt for the other one organized by the National Election Debate Group. But the opposition parties, boycotted that exercise. In 2015, it was the APC presidential candidate, who didn't show up for that particular exercise. So since 1993, we've not really had a presidential debate that featured the two main candidates. Okay. Let's begin by understanding why this is so. Has there been a systematic, way for the big contenders of boycotting this exercise?
I'll be very honest with you, and this is my opinion. Presidential debate is not a legal requirement to run for office. There's nowhere in the Electoral Act of 2010 that states that for a candidate to run for office, he must engage in a presidential debate.
But it's highly recommended, even by INEC.
It's recommended, but it's optional. Okay. It's not a legal requirement. And he is a lawyer. Whatever is not a legal requirement, I'm not bound to attend. So it's left to the choice.
Isn't there a moral, obligation for whoever wants to become president to at least give the electorate the opportunity to ask him fundamental questions or hear him? Because the fallout of that is that the only time you can see whether a candidate is capable or not is when he's already elected.
But even before a candidate gets elected, he goes on TV programs, he goes on radio interviews, he goes on campaign, he goes on road shows whereby he engages the electorate directly.
But so at that point, he is not standing at par with other candidates who are also, aspiring for the same office. It's quite different. When you're doing PR interview, it's different from, having a debate, an intellectual civil discourse, where your plans can be questioned.
Like I said, when we started, it's a good thing for democratic system. It's good for the electorate to engage the candidates and compare them on the same stage. It's very good, and I'm not opposed to that. But like I said, it's the decision of the candidate to decide whether to go or not to go.
Dr. Fassi, are you not concerned that since 1993 we've not had the main contenders stand at par on the platform to discuss what really they want to do for Nigeria?
Well, to some extent, that may be because we need to grow our democracy. But speaking stricto sensu, we've said it's not a legal requirement. It's at the pleasure of whoever is contesting to make himself available. And there are other fora, there are other platforms one could use. And as I said, I made reference to America the other time, the United States of America. All the polls we got favored Hillary Clinton. But at the end of the day, she got the popular votes, but she was not elected.
She lost the electoral college vote.
Yes. So, a candidate will decide that, look, this is not the platform I want to choose. But you might be talking about the moral suasion. Yes, it is advisable, it is expedient, but if you think that is not one of the areas, and perhaps you know that perhaps you're not the sweet talker, you're not the type that can bamboozle people with with information or with figures and what have you, you may decide to
So
leave
opt
that.
out.
And I tell you, in the beginning, we look at Awolowo was not much of an orator. He would not be able to stand the like of a Sikh or the Golden Voice of Africa, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa. But yet, he was reputed to be the best president Nigeria never had. And again, he was able to take Western region there, as it was, to the level that was beyond and over and above the rest of the regions.
But was he able to convince the people about what he was going to do?
He was able to. Otherwise, he would not have been voted in, and he would not have been respected. And again, to date, the only true Yoruba leader we've ever had.
Already, ahead 2019, the PDP presidential candidate was quoted to have said that he cannot wait for a presidential debate. We've seen President Buhari in presidential debate in 2007 and 2011. Do you expect to see him, debating in 2019?
I can't preempt him. I'm not a spokesperson.
Would you love to see it?
Oh,
Would you love to see a Buhari-Atiku debate?
It will be nice. It will be nice. But like he rightly said, we must not equate oratory skills with capacity. And we've seen in political settings at times that oftentimes the good orator only is just blowing hot. And that the man who is quiet, who hardly communicates his vision, is more of a performer than the speaker. And I love the example of Awolowo that he cited. I wasn't born in the 50s and 60s when he was campaigning, but I've seen some videos. He didn't have oratory skills, but he was a deep thinker. And people saw the effect of his thinking in terms of policies and what he's been able to achieve.
Perhaps the electorate also acquire or possess this ability to look beyond the oration. It doesn't matter how you perform really at the debate. Perhaps they had the capacity to see through the eyes, and that was what worked for Awolowo in those years.
Well, that time he had the advantage of what I call the first mover advantage. That generation was a new generation just coming up, okay, and people were open to new ideas. But also beyond that, he had his own way of reaching the people. I mean, I've read his autobiographies. Nobody within that generation campaigned more than he did. He went to the nooks and crannies, engaging with the people one-on-one. For him, that was an effective way of communicating his vision. And I said earlier on that it doesn't have to be through the debate. I need to find the best way that suits me to reach you as the electorate. Awolowo didn't use presidential debate or premiership debate or whatever you could have called it in 51 and 1956. He went to the nooks and crannies of all the regions. And even when he ran 1959, he was in Kano, he was in Kaduna, he was in Enugu. He believed that he needed to reach the people, that you need to feel the person that wants to lead you. So it's not compulsory that it has to be a presidential debate.
Dr. Fasid, really, why would anybody boycott an election debate? Isn't that even a higher platform of campaign? Because more people are likely going to be watching. It's another airtime for you to tell the people what you intend to do.
I told you that, as a student of communication, it doesn't work out that way. It does not work out that way. As I said, it is not, even in America, where it has taken root, it will not necessarily determine how the votes will swing. But as I said, it's just one of the platforms you can use. You have direct mails, you have town hall meetings, you have person-to-person contact and address. You also have your campaign strategy. Like, I all believed in strategy, and some of us were involved those days. If not in the action group days, in the UPN days. And we were able to see at first how this man was able to get us to do things for him. And everybody was committed, everybody was involved, unlike what you have now. So, to my mind, it will not really determine much. As I said, it's less than 0.1%. I'm talking about 7 million voters. Maybe at the end of the day, about 40 to 45 will be voting. But what is the percentage of that to those listening? And in any case, how many of us can really comprehend what they were saying in English language?
Let's talk, we're rounding up now. Let's talk about corruption, which also, was a talking point at the just concluded vice presidential debate. For the PDP candidates, you don't close your shop and go out fighting, fighting thieves. But the APC candidates on the other side is of the opinion that if you don't, fight corruption. All right, I believe we have that beat for you, and we'll just play it for you shortly, and we'll be back.
Fighting corruption is not an economic policy. It is not that you can't fight corruption, but you can fight it more aggressively while addressing economic issues. For example, in 2015, unemployment and underemployment was 24%. Today it's 40%. In 2015, we attracted $21 billion in foreign direct investment. We attracted only 17 last year. We attracted only 12 last year. That means it's going to, our GDP was 520 in 2015. Our per capita was 2,500. Today it's under 1,900. If you look at our stock market, it's lost over 2 trillion in 1 year. So that is not any policy. You're not creating jobs, you're not doing the right thing, and you're just fighting corruption. You can't shut down your shop and be chasing criminals.
If you allow criminals to steal all the inventory in the shop, there will be no shop. That's the problem. Please. That's the problem. Please. And what has happened to Nigeria in the past 16 years is what the World Bank told us, that the major cause of our poverty is corruption. That's a major cause. That's what we've been told. So let me say that there is no way that we can minimize what has happened. We can't minimize corruption. If you minimize it, we run the risk of completely, in fact, the argument is lost. We cannot do what we want to do unless we're able to minimize corruption or eradicate it completely, which is what we're trying to do.
Interesting, isn't it? So it appears like we're in between the devil and the deep blue sea. On one hand, corruption is at the base of underdevelopment in this country. On the other hand, EFCC claims to have repatriated millions of dollars, won over 700 convictions in the past 3.5 years, and people are asking how much of that has also benefited the nation's economy. What are your thoughts about that?
Corruption is a major problem. Whoever says that corruption shouldn't be an economic policy, nothing can be further from the truth. The PDP candidate cited an example of China. And it is interesting to note that before China took off in their economic and industrial revolution, which started about 30, 40 years ago, was that they put in place laws that made it impossible for you to actually steal money. Today in China, for graft offenses, the punishment is either you are killed or life imprisonment. Because if you don't deal with corruption, you can't implement policies.
It's all right. Let me quickly have your take on this, Dr. Fassi.
Honestly, if you tackle corruption, the rest of our problems will be resolved. Because without tackling corruptions, without fighting corruption to the earth, we can never make progress. Because it is the bane of our underdevelopment. And if you ask me, corruption should be made a capital offense. That if you commit corruption and you're found guilty, honestly, the least you get is maximum life imprisonment.
And that is if we can define well what corruption is.
Corruption, in terms of...
We had this debate a couple of years ago, whether stealing is the same as corruption.
No, we did not say that. It was somebody there that said it. Somebody who ought to have said it, that said it.
Dr. Fassi, we have to go now. Obafemi George is a public affairs analyst who joined us today on This Morning. Thank you very much for coming.
My pleasure.
Dr. Fassi Yusuf, lawyer and communications consultant. It's always a pleasure to have you join us on this program. Let us say happy birthday to Mr. President. He's 76 years today. We wish him all the best, of course, in steering the ways of the nation. and even as it prepares for yet another election year. This conversation continues on all of our social media platforms, and we urge you to be a part of it. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Thanks for being there. See you again tomorrow.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
Happy birthday.